This is a podcast which does not shy away from difficult and vulnerable topics, and we ask you to take care of yourselves when you listen. The content is of an adult nature, and we do swear at times.
Welcome to the Autistic Licence podcast. I'm Leo in London.
I'm Shauna, and I'm Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
We invite you to listen in on our conversations as we experiment with unmasking in an autistic space. We talk about what it means to discover we're autistic as adults, especially with established careers as therapists. We want people to know that autistic therapists exist and to broaden the conversation about neurodiversity. You're so welcome to join us, whoever you are and wherever in the world you are. We hope you'll find something of interest and connection here.
So as soon as I mentioned Dave Matthews Band, you immediately mentioned something about the animal magnetism, the animal magnetism of Dave Matthews himself. And that's fairly new to you. You are a convert, thanks to me.
I'm not a convert.
Well, no, a convert is, and you didn't know who they were until a few months ago.
Didn't know who they were.
It was me who introduced you to them, and in watching some of the videos.
Yeah, you did it visually, which was a good move. If you had have just sent me, the music, I might have gone, yeah.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, it's all right. And then, of course, I did have to Google and find out his history and things like that. And this is where I know that grey sexuality fits me better than demisexuality, because I don't know Dave Matthews. Now, certainly I would like to get to know Dave Matthews. But I don't know Dave Matthews, but I can be initially drawn to him based on what the appeal that he gives out.
I imagine that we'll have found some links to some glossaries and articles and stuff that we'll put in the show notes. But for the context while we're talking, I think, and also because the idea of grey sexuality, which again resonated with me too, this is part of the joy of the development of all of these bits of language, is we can find things that fit that we didn't know before. And could you just do a little glossary overview of these bits of language around sexuality? So
under the umbrella of asexuality, where in general, if somebody asks me, who are you what type of people are you sexually attracted to? I will say nobody, because I'm just not sexually attracted to people. It just doesn't happen. So it just, in general, doesn't happen. But within asexuality, there are some of us who will occasionally have strong attractions, and sometimes they will come out of a demi experience where there's a strong emotional relationship with the person, and then other types of attraction, romantic and sexual, can come alongside that. Sometimes it can be grey sexuality covers demi as well, but it can also be like a pure kind of, I'm attracted to that person for some reason and I don't know them, and for some people they may or may not have a desire to ever get to know them. So the kind of, I suppose as well, like we're making a distinction between sexuality and romantic attraction. So some people will be asexual and aromantic. I'm not. I'm very, very romantic and always have been very, very romantic. So I will be romantically attracted to people, but I'm talking about sexual attraction. So some people will be aro-ace, so they will be aromantic and asexual, and both are just never attracted to anybody. Also, these things are not, they're not necessarily correlated with behaviour. So being asexual doesn't mean that you never have sex or you never want to have sex. Being aromantic, it doesn't mean anything about your behaviour. You may or may not participate in romantic activities or sexual activities. some people are sex repulsed, other people are totally fine with sex, they just don't have an orientation towards it or a desire for it until they might be in the context. So there's so many definitions.
Because of that, not being aware of that, I wonder how much of my kind of previous impressions of my own sexuality had been just conditioned, that were around expectations. I know that all my life, since being at school, and one of the worst insults you could hurl at somebody was that they were gay, that was something that's been thrown at me in that context as an insult, but subsequently as an assumption sometimes. And that's never been true, I don't think. I don't think I've often trying to put this into, I'm reformulating things in my head as I speak now, because I wonder again if some of the things that I would talk about in terms of describing myself 10, 20, 30 years ago would have been just around again conditioned expectations. Because I've always thought, well, I'm not gay because most people who... This would have been my kind of stereotypical, biased, prejudiced take on things, that a gay person would struggle with coming out to their family, to their friends, whatever, and therefore that would be a principal reason why it would be suppressed for a long time. And I know that's absolutely true for many gay people, or people whose sexuality is other than straight heterosexual. And I thought, well, that's not me, because my parents, I always imagined if I were gay and if I were to come out to them, I've never thought that would be a problem, and I don't believe it would have been. So that for me was a really good rationale for saying, well, yeah, I'm straight. I've said this before about gender as well, it's just kind of irrelevant.
Well, because you're privileged, it's irrelevant.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Good point. Sorry, that was going without saying, but it absolutely needs to be. Yes, of course. But, yes, and as you were saying at the beginning of that little bit, when you say asexual to somebody, the stereotype that comes up is that that's somebody who does not have a sex drive, a sex life, or any interest in sex, and maybe romance too. Yeah. And, as again...
Or celibate. Their behaviour is celibate. They don't have a...
But you can
sex life.
No. But but out of choice. Asexual, meaning that the drive to have that isn't present. And and therefore I think the first bit of terminology that I came across under that umbrella was demisexual, which is where there can be sexual attraction, but it is dependent on there being emotional attraction and emotional connection. You're not just going to fancy someone and want to have sex with them and without some kind of emotional connection between you. And that absolutely resonated with me. That's not something that I've ever been interested in or felt any pull toward. And in fact, it's probably got in the way of me having some fun when I was single. That
it wouldn't have been fun.
Well, probably not. But
it might have been though, because if you distinguish between libido,
yes, exactly,
drive or desire or orientation,
yes,
then
there might have been some fun to be had.
Yeah.
In a non-committed way, but because that was so strongly part of my identity that I need to be in a relationship with somebody and then sex might follow. So Demi made a lot of sense to me, but there's something then, and I still haven't completely got my head around it, so I might ask you for a little bit more on this now, about why grey sexuality was an even better fit. And that was something to do with even less definition around what might cause, is that the right word? A peak in drive or an attraction to a particular person that isn't actually necessarily dependent on a demisexuality.
I think that there's an unpredictability about grey sexuality, and for me it shows me that I'm not fundamentally straight, because I've felt a demi attraction, which was romantic and sexual, to a friend who was another woman. And I've had an attraction to this other woman who I did not know.
Yes.
So
okay, yes.
Makes that kind of goes, well, okay, I'm not straight in my orientation. That's different from my behaviour, but I'm not straight in my orientation. And grey covers that so much better than demi, because the second example that I just gave wasn't demi. But I think you could still be demi, or up until now be demi. But for me,
in my behaviour, but in my behaviour, because
in your behaviour, you're demi.
Because if I don't, I think if I don't,
but that's not what demi is. Demi, all of these things are about orientation. The same as even being gay. People think being gay means that you express your sexuality in activity with someone who has the same gender identity as you.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't. It's who you're attracted to. It's nothing to do with how you behave or don't behave. That's a whole different thing. Yes. So this is about orientation. It's not about the sexual activity that you have or don't have, or the romantic activity that you have or don't have. They're completely different things. This is all about orientation. And so orientation-wise, how do I know? I could be attracted to someone of any gender or any sexuality tomorrow, you know, or in 10 years' time. There's no predictability for it at all. And I can't say I'm attracted to men, I'm attracted to women, I'm attracted to someone who's gender fluid or of no gender, or I can't say any. I don't know.
No.
Because I'm fundamentally, on a day-to-day basis, my orientation is not sexually attracted.
And that's the important thing. I often struggle with new language around these things, because sometimes the actual kind of choice of words to describe these things that turns into a label doesn't quite fit. So that's the other thing about grey sexuality, is it's a grey area. That's the definition that
what fits. And
exactly.
That's what really
that's
fits.
what I needed to understand, because and then I can grasp the concept, and it'll either resonate or not resonate. And I do find that really resonates. It's definitely a movable feast, if you like. That's unpredictable. But because I haven't actually experienced many aspects of that, that doesn't mean that resonance isn't real. That's the point, I suppose.
That's right. And sometimes we just know something without having all the examples to prove it. I mean, I guess someone might know that they're gay, of course, before they've even had a relationship. Of course they do, you know, and before they've experienced very much of it in relationship with somebody, or they've acted or anything like that. So we can kind of know something that just feels right. And there's something around it where it fits with feeling like you don't fit in, and like it's kind of invisible or hidden as well, which really fits. But then within the LGBTQ plus community, sometimes there's a difficulty with accepting the A's, because we have the privilege often of passing. We don't. It's not really clear. So some people say that the A stands for ally, and they won't let the A stand for asexuality. Or they say you're only allowed in if you're asexual and you're also bi. So they won't let people in who are asexual and who are straight. As in, they might be straight romantic, or they might not have but they're not allowed in unless they've got another kind of thing. But that can make people feel like they actually don't fit anywhere, because they really don't fit in heteronormative
and that's I
don't fit in heteronormative
exactly. I would say the same thing, and this is where also we tie it into the autistic experience or the neurodivergent experience, is there is so much more of a high prevalence of queerness in the broadest sense in our community and within our neurotypes. So this opens up the whole intersection of queerness in the broadest sense, but in particularly we're talking about sexuality today, and an autistic experience, and why there appears to be quite a big intersection, quite a big overlap. That an identification with queerness seems to go along with, more often than in neurotypical experience, a neurodivergent experience. Hence, neuroqueer as a term, for example. And we've often had a reaction to using that term, a very positive one. And I suppose there's a pathological response to that, which is, well, there's a different kind of brain at work. That must be why. That must have something to do with it.
Yeah.
But I don't know about that. That seems way too clinical, way too oversimplified to me. I do think there's probably something about a more honest, open and direct way of thinking about our lives, especially when we are more and more unmasked, which is kind of also self-defining, I suppose, because those autistic people who are unmasked will be those who will be aware that they're autistic, they've been diagnosed, or they self-diagnose or self-identify. And we, as neurodivergent therapists, come into contact with them. So am I making sense? That would explain why a very high prevalence of people I work with will identify as queer. And there's also something, I guess, about, if I'm thinking about suppressing queerness of whatever type, but again, we're talking about sexuality today, suppressing it's a version of masking. If you've got to the point in your life where you have identified yourself as autistic, you are masking way less and therefore probably more open to not suppressing your sexuality. And your orientations in terms of sexuality and relationship models and how you express love.
Is it then connected to a kind of an activism as well? So if we also see this in the context of queer theory and queer as a verb, which is a way of being in the world which subverts heteronormative ways of being.
And neurotypical ways of being. It feels that it's that broad now.
Well, they're two different things. So
yes, but the intersection of those two things is where the term neuroqueer springs from, isn't it?
It is. But there's something, it's a combination of queering, queering your identity in the world from both how you express your neurotype and how you express your sexuality or gender. I think it's got to be both. I think that's how Nick Walker sees it. And I think that then if I reflect on my own hesitancy, and part of this is because of not knowing whether the queer community would accept me because I'm so, I pass as a non-queer person, then for me to queer would mean that I have to be out more and be activist, and it's about a practice. It's not a closeted term.
Yes.
It's an active advocacy statement.
Yes. And we do use some queer language purely in relation to neurodivergence. You know, we talk about being out as autistic or as autistic therapists in our case. And that obviously is not a closeted position just from a neurodivergent point of view. But I suppose you're saying or asking, do we get to use that language if we are in every other respect heteronormative, monogamous?
We can be those things while being, we can still speak out, because we can be autistic and speak out, and we're just one version of autistic. You know, there's lots of versions of autistic.
Exactly.
I guess that, is it a difference between an identity and a practice? So we have neurodivergent identity because we're born that way.
Yes.
We practice in a queer way when we actually actively subvert. Is that right?
That feels right to me, but who am I to define a term? Or who is anybody to define a term? That's part of what we're talking about, is how we identify ourselves, how we, and then you are right. I would totally agree with you that an important part of identity, whether we label it as queer or anything else, is being congruent with it in the world.
Yes.
If we include neurodivergent, being an out neurodivergent person,
then that is, well, maybe that is queering, but is that allowed under...
Well, this is the thing, we say it aloud. That makes me want to know, well, by who?
Well, I guess if we're using a term that's coined by a particular person, then there was a definition.
Yes.
And so I'm asking, do I fit that?
And okay, and then I think we're starting to intersect and overlap with imposter syndrome as well. Do I have, which I agree with and I experience myself, absolutely. Do I have the right to appropriate queer language? Is it appropriating?
Yeah.
To use or identify as some version of queer purely, not the microphone, purely on the basis of my neurodivergence. I don't know. But the thing is, I don't think that's the case with me anyway, because of what we've been talking about in terms of sexuality and grey sexuality, for example, that it isn't dependent necessarily on sex. It is not dependent on gender.
I think your gender identity is more queer.
Definitely.
From what you've said before, than maybe your... Well, we don't know. Then maybe
no, we've talked about this. No, you're absolutely right. That is part of my identity. That, I was saying some months ago, I think, something like my identity has always been expressed as gender-wise, that it's kind of irrelevant to me. It doesn't play a part. And what's been very uncomfortable has been the expectations of what I'm supposed to do and how I'm supposed to present, because I'm called a man. That doesn't go as far as being dysphoric or dysmorphic in gender terms. However, what I remember saying at the time was, I'm beginning to think that's a little bit of a cop-out to say it doesn't matter. I think it does matter. I don't necessarily have a better label for it.
Or is it saying it doesn't matter is the entitlement of privilege, though?
Yes.
That's why,
because I get
dominant groups get to say, well, I don't need to learn about autism. I don't need to learn about BIPOC.
And that's what I think I started to understand about myself and my, labelling in that way, that it started to feel uncomfortable and a cop-out, as I say. There's probably a better word than that.
If you say that it's irrelevant, but the other side of that is that could be an internalised heteronormativity that says it's irrelevant. But if you actually go, no, it is relevant, but then you challenge yourself, so what are you going to do about it? Then you queer it. So you go, right, well, okay, this, maybe I don't fit the norm. So what is it? What's authentically me, and how do I express that?
Yes.
That's queering, but that would be to queer it rather than to rest on a privilege that doesn't even need to engage with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And but, because I'm not sure which one, imposter syndrome rears its head again because I have that privilege of passing.
Yeah.
Is it appropriating to start using labels that have appeared in order to soothe suffering? Suffering that I have not necessarily experienced. Do you know what I mean? That's where the imposter syndrome might come up for me. The fact that I can pass, I can mask, I can just continue and let people assume that I'm entirely cisgendered, straight, neurotypical, if you want.
Yeah.
does that... It's tricky. And again, I can't help but think that people who really have and are suffering will also find this very discussion of me thinking about it and having that privilege of even having this discussion.
That's right. And that's probably why, like I was saying earlier, in terms of asexuality, you know, I guess I would have the choice, did have the choice, just to rest on the, you know, living with her husband of 20 years. So she must be straight. And there's something around, well, me talking about it now isn't necessary. It's a privilege, maybe, to talk about it now. I don't know. But it also raises awareness. So there's an advocacy.
Yes, that's what I was just coming to.
And also, is it not a denial of myself to say that other people have it worse and I don't deserve to be talking about it? Because... Thank you. You know, actually, I did struggle a lot when I was younger by not appearing to have the same sexual attraction as everybody around me. You know, like, I did feel weird. I did think there's something wrong with me. I did think about all of that, and it doesn't bother me now, but it did, and it is difficult, and young asexual people need visibility.
So 2 points that you just made that I just want to kind of underline, because you're right, and it's how I talk to other people, is that, yes, it's very important that we have these conversations regardless of our privilege, because there will be people who will also feel invalid or closeted in those ways, and they need to hear somebody they can identify with in order to understand themselves better and maybe be more honest about their own identities, or explore it in a way that we might make more comfortable by talking about it. And the other thing is, and this is something I talk about all the time, because there's so many people who come into therapy who feel very privileged, and they recognise that it is a privilege. It is a privilege to be able to go into therapy at all. And so what you get so often, I'm sure you experience the same thing, is people saying, well, I don't deserve this. There are people who have it so much worse than me. And my argument for that is, well, you know, suffering is suffering. And you take that to its logical extreme. I know I've said this before, I think, on this podcast, that there's only then one person at any moment that's allowed to revel in their suffering because they've got it worse than everybody else. And the other thing, which somebody in my work said to me once, which really stuck, he said, we never say you shouldn't be happy because there's always somebody happier than you.
Lovely,
it is lovely. And we would never say that. So, you know, suffering is suffering, and it's valid, and it is worthy of attending to. And we have to self-apply that when we start experiencing our own imposter syndrome around whether we have the right to employ bits of identity and language to ourselves. Because of our privilege. Of course we have privilege, but there has also been suffering. Absolutely. My sexuality has been doubted by those around me all my life. Or questioned. Sorry, doubted. There you go. There was a prejudiced word right there. Although I suppose doubt is correct in terms of what I might present versus what they might suspect, that they would doubt what I was presenting. But, you know, that could be very cruel. And obviously the younger you are, the crueler and more judgy that is. As I was saying, you know, earlier in the first part of this conversation, that would be one of the worst insults at school in the 70s to hurl at somebody, was they were gay.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course we were only in single-digit years from it having been illegal at that point. And it was still in the DSM.
So context.
Context. Are we going to talk about then the fact that we just listened to the conversation so far?
Yeah. So context is that we recorded what has just been played last week or a couple of weeks ago at some point, but we got interrupted. I think Lana was ringing me maybe. And so we never finished it. And then we have just reviewed it and realised that it's kind of, we don't want to lose it. We don't want to put it out, but it's not really finished. The conversation never really got finished. So we want to try and finish it now, which
That's
is
right.
kind of a tall order when you're not in the middle of things. But we're hoping that because we've just listened to ourselves, that we might be able to get back into, it'll still be whatever we feel like saying now. We've lost whatever we might have felt like saying then. But
that's the other lovely thing, though, because this conversation between us on this very broadest of subjects has been going on for quite a long time. In fact, there's even an earlier version of it in the queering relationships episode, and it has evolved since, even I'm just thinking back about what I was saying earlier on in that first conversation. Now this is going to get complicated. In the conversation that you've just heard in this episode, there was something where I kind of moved on from saying about gender being irrelevant to me, and feeling that that was, as I said a number of times, a cop out, and that that I was actually thinking a little bit more or less definitively, depending on which angle you come from. Mm-hmm. But that it's not irrelevant; it is actually different.
Yeah. And I think, I think that as a way of being that we are, hoping to embody in this podcast is that we are not afraid to evolve and change our minds and develop and grow. And like right from the start, we've kind of said, I remember like dissecting this in detail in the beginning for myself, kind of going like, but I won't believe the same things next month is what I'm going to say. So how can I do a podcast? Because then people will think that I'm still thinking that or feeling that then, and I'm constantly changing. And we kind of recognize that and realize that there's value in being authentic within the process. And also the other thing is that as therapists, that's what happens in our therapy rooms all the time.
Yes, it is, of course.
That, people will not be the same the next week that they come to see us. We will not be the same.
If they do, then we're probably not very good at what we do.
People are always changing, and you get snapshots in time and you get connection at the time, and then it evolves and changes. And even listening to that today, there was times when I was going, oh no, I sound really bad. I sound like I'm saying this. I didn't really mean that. I want to correct that. And there's that kind of judgment that I'm working on that kind of goes, but you're not trying to be perfect.
Judgment and the judgment of an autistic person who wants to be clear and definitive all the time. And that's something that we've had to make peace with as podcasters, because, well, unlike traditional media to a point where it's broadcast at a time and that is then a moment in time, we've no idea when anybody might listen to this episode. It's May 2024, but that doesn't, I listen to episodes of other podcasts from 2012. Who knows? We could very well be extremely different people, but who cares? This is our voice being spoken and recorded today, and it has value today.
And it's less about, I think as well, like it's less about the accuracy, because we're not trying to deliver a training session. So it's less about the accuracy and less about, I guess that people could go, oh, Shauna's saying this. I don't like Shauna's saying that. Or she must really think this. And it's less about me and more about that we're kind of modelling having a dialogue about things that are really, really difficult to have a dialogue about. Like most people don't have those kind of dialogues or do them publicly, because it is vulnerable and it is going to change. We are going to make mistakes. There is stuff that I said that is bound to be offensive or politically incorrect, or
to certain people at certain moments, yes.
Or I will change in another month, or I could have said it better if I had rehearsed or written a script. And
unless you make peace with that, you can't do this. Modelling how conversations can evolve, but also modelling something wondering about dealing with shame, because I think we've both heard ourselves at various points since we've been doing this, and wished that we hadn't said it, or wished we'd said something in a different way, or been clearer, or not given an impression we feel we might have given to some people. And we can model actually that we can say something, then the other one might address it or contradict it. And this is something that so many humans seem to have such great difficulty with. I mean, this is just about, I suppose, healthy conversation.
Yeah.
That too often we wait for our turn to speak, and it's a queuing system rather than an actual empathic listening and response. I mean, that's really basic stuff, I know.
Well, yeah, but it's how we come into these recordings. It's how we are right now. There is no preparation. No. So we're not waiting for our turn to speak because we've got something written down that we want to make sure that we get across. That's not how we do this. And that is something around, there's a understanding the context and understanding that it's two people co-creating in the moment something that is real and has value at the time. That's what therapy is.
And here's where we're doing what we do, which is not to plan how a conversation goes. When we came to supplement our previous conversation, it was potentially, to continue on the theme of queerness and maybe but what we're doing right now is we're talking about communication, we're talking about openness, and I wonder if part of that isn't just because spontaneously that's what's happened and that's what's relevant to us right now, but what I experienced with you over the last couple of hours while we reviewed that recording was a real dial down of the very imposter syndrome that I was experiencing when we did that recording and we were talking about it. I feel more validated talking about queerness in relation to myself than I did when we recorded that conversation a week or two ago, just from having reviewed it with you.
Lovely. Okay.
I'm wondering if there's anything that's happened for you, not necessarily in the same way or on the same theme, but just by sitting together, listening to, I mean, this sounds so fucking self-indulgent, doesn't it?
Listening to ourselves.
Listening to ourselves and then talking about listening to ourselves talking.
Well, kind of people that are drawn to become therapists,
Well, very much so. And unnecessarily so, probably.
Okay. Well, when I get, so first of all, there was obviously that part that came in really strong, which was judgmental and thinking that I wasn't slick enough or clear enough, or like I didn't make enough qualifying statements. But I heard myself kind of also where I was actually, it was about me and me looking to see if I would fit into the definition and trying to be kind of really, really true to Nick Walker's definition of neuroqueer as I understood it, at that time on that day. I didn't read the text in preparation. So I don't know if it was accurate, but that would be really, really important to me, that I would be true to the person who coined the definition. However, part of that commitment could also have been to try and come against the imposter syndrome that you brought up at the end. And maybe if I wasn't having to deal with so much of that, then maybe I wouldn't hold myself to such rigid definitions. Yeah. So what am I saying that I hear? Like you just asked me there, what am I saying that I hear in retrospect? I can hear that I did not, that this is something that I spiral round and round and round and round, and will continue to spiral round and round and round and round. And then maybe at some point it'll just become, well, that's just how it is. I define myself as neuroqueer. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm there yet. And I think it's probably the same as with autistic. It took me years, and now I don't question it, and I don't really have imposter syndrome around that. I am autistic.
Yes, I think if somebody were to challenge you on that definition of yourself as autistic, you'd be extremely robust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even though just as many people would probably doubt it now as ever did, but it doesn't.
Yes, yeah.
It doesn't affect me, and I don't feel the need to go, do I fit that definition? Do I fit that definition? It is what it is.
That's what I meant. Yes, that is robust. That's very solid, as it is. Definitely for me too.
Yeah.
I mean, probably actually the most solid part of my identity, the one that I have least doubts about. I would include all the versions of queerness. I would include all the stuff about gender, sexuality, all of that. That's all kind of open up for discussion, question, thinking about.
Yeah.
But not whether or not I'm neurodivergent.
Yeah. You're autistic as fuck, Leo.
with some occasionally very useful dollops of ADHD that
lots of ADHD.
Allowed me to stay up till 3:00 this morning editing 3 different episodes of this podcast simultaneously.
That's right. But I should say ADHD. I don't think your ADHD is in doubt. And I don't actually doubt my ADHD these days either, whereas I did for a long time. So that's another thing that I was still going round with, even 6 months ago.
And I was going to say, that is in the time that we've known each other.
Oh, yeah. A year ago, I didn't have
That's
it.
right.
I remember, you were the one that first of all kind of said, well, actually,
That's it. I think it's...
No, not ADHD. No.
That will be recorded somewhere.
No, that's right. Yeah, it's interesting. And maybe for some people, I guess, it's all of a piece. And maybe that's...
Say that phrase again. For some people, it's...
all of a piece, maybe that's
I think it is. I think
so all of a piece, like it's all
part of the same thing.
Part and parcel of the same thing.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, part and parcel of the same thing. Right. Translation from Northern Irish to
I love it.
London English. Not British. Leo does not like it.
There's no such thing.
British. London English. So anyway, what was I saying before I was interrupted?
It's all of a piece.
By my own thoughts. It's all of a piece. Your gender, sexuality, and your neurodivergence. And I think that's where Nick Walker was coming from. That for her, they were kind of inseparable, you know, so actually coming out in terms of gender and sexuality alongside coming out as autistic, like there's the intersectionality is so tight and it can't really be separated. And I guess that for some of us, we come out on one dimension before another dimension. And then there's lots of people in the queer community who are out as queer but actually don't yet know that they're also neurodivergent. So it works in different ways for different people. Yeah.
Well, I hope that our conversation has done for at least some people what I think it's done for each other, which is just to dial up the confidence in even having these thoughts and explorations, having fewer fixed answers in our heads about who we are.
Yeah, and the nature of dialogue. That we don't get to this on our own. We don't get to this from reading books. Like, we have to actually be vulnerable and speak it out, and then again and again and again. So go talk, discuss, contact us. We love talking about this stuff. So send us emails, autisticlicense@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.
Talk to you next time.
We won't see you next time. We don't know what you look like. We don't have the facilities, do you? We will talk at you.
So autistic. Somebody diagnose me quick. Goodbye, Leo.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye, Shauna.
Thank you for listening to the Autistic License podcast. You can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook at autisticlicense.com or by email at autisticlicense@gmail.com. At this point, Leo likes me to spell the word license because we spell it in different ways in different parts of the world. We spell it Licence. We also have a thriving Facebook community. You can search for Autistic License Shauna and Leo on Facebook, or you can click on the link in the show notes.